So the philosophy behind NIFW is simply this. Whether your primary vocation is inside a home, as a volunteer, or for pay, the essential question that you have to ask if you're a person of faith is, how does my faith integrate with my life vocationally? Imagine this. Imagine that you are a committed person of faith and you have a job or a vocation that keeps you occupied for 40 to 60 hours a week, give or take, and your faith never touches those 40 to 60 hours, even though your faith is the most important thing to you. That sounds relatively absurd. And so what we're trying to do with the NIFW is to join other movements, other really good movements in Nashville, to help kindle the imagination of what it looks like to intersect these two aspects of human life and human existence, of the spiritual and the vocational, because vocational is spiritual, and spiritual is vocational. And one without the other leads to all kinds of trouble. And so tonight, what I want to do briefly in my short period of time that I was reminded of is talk about work under three headings. I'd like to talk about the reason for work, the nature of it, and the healing of it. The reason for work is that we're designed for it. That human flourishing, the full expression of our humanity and of our bearing and carrying the image of God depends on vocational movement in our lives. The idea that work itself is a curse or an irritating necessity that helps us get to the really important things and fund the really important things is reflective of what we pastors call bad theology. It's a terrible understanding of what God himself has said about work and of what my vocational mentor, Catherine Alsdorf, would have told you tonight. The very first thing that God discloses about himself in the scriptures is that he's a worker. In the beginning, God created. And then in the beginning, for 6 solid days, God put his hands in the dirt and started making stuff. And then after those 6 days, he rested, thus establishing the rhythm of existence for those who are created in his image, the human race. And the very first command that God gives to the human race is to get working. You know, after their first day of life, which was the day of rest, Adam and Eve were to tend God's garden. They were to cultivate it. And what my former colleague and friend, and not former friend, former colleague and always friend Tim Keller likes to say, history began in a garden. History will end in a city. And that suggests that we are part of a developing movement. History is essentially the garden developing into a robust city of God that we get a small picture of in the last chapters of the Bible. The new heaven and the new earth, the city of God coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband, and so on. So he commissions them as gardeners, and a very important aspect of that moment in history when he commissions them as gardeners is that what God does with work is he puts it into paradise. So before anything went wrong with the world, and before anything went wrong with humanity, anything went wrong with work itself, God put work into paradise, which means that paradise itself is a vocational existence. We're most fully alive when we're engaged in either the act of creating something new from raw material that can benefit the human community, or when we are redeeming something or someone or some place that has been broken. Which says to us that all work is just as spiritual as pastoring, being a missionary, planting a church, etc. Every kind of work, every kind of vocation that involves a creative element and or a redeeming element and restoring element is an extension of God's hands in the world through human people. That includes people who believe in him, and that also includes people who don't. Because even people who don't believe in God are created in the image of God and have that vocational instinct and impulse within, and it has to be carried out. It's instinctive in children. Children get up in the morning and they start, drawing pictures, or they start building and deconstructing Lego structures. It's instinctive. And then as adults, we go to work and we get cynical. We feel like we're more sophisticated and we know more about how the real world works than children do. And so we don't enjoy our work like they enjoy the Legos and like they enjoy the crayons and the pieces of paper, because we know that work is a bad thing, because we're sophisticated and we're grown up. And what the Scripture invites us to do is to grow up by becoming children again. And to understand that the children have it right, because as soon as we retire, what happens? From that job that we've always hated, what happens as soon as we retire? We go through an identity crisis. Who am I? What is my existence for? We can't get away from this. So that's the reason for work. We're designed for it. The nature of work, I think, can be sort of put in the category of three headings itself. And please understand, too, that I am speaking from a Judeo-Christian perspective. I don't assume that everybody believes in Christianity or in Judaism or in the Bible, but hopefully these things that I'm talking about will make sense to you whether you believe or not, because the Scriptures were actually written for the purpose of helping human beings, all human beings, to flourish. The good news of Jesus Christ is not fully the good news that it's meant to be until it's good news for everybody. And so work has, first and foremost, a mission element to it. In other words, work can be looked at as a calling. If you're an engineer, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a sanitation worker, if you're in law enforcement, if you're a minister, if you're a dentist, you can look at your vocation. If you're a stay-at-home parent, you can look at your vocation in the same way that I look at my vocation. That God has invited you to partner with Him in something meaningful. And whatever you do to create, whatever you do to redeem and restore is meaningful. It's participation in the work of God, and it's an extension of the person of God through human hands. I'll give you a few examples. The vocation of parenting reflects the nurture of God. The sanitation profession reflects the orderliness and beauty of God. Artists and entrepreneurs, you represent the creativity of God. Government officials and executives, you represent the rule of God. Accountants, the orderliness of God. There's a whole book in the Bible called Numbers. Healthcare professionals, the healing hands of God. Law enforcement, the justice of God. Education, the wisdom and mind of God. Social work, the mercy of God. Construction, that God is a builder and an architect. Fashion and grooming, you reflect the fact that God is a God of beauty. So what if we rethought the idea of missions and missionaries? What if, in addition to commissioning church planters and missionaries and pastors to do their good work, we also commissioned artists in the name of God, and doctors in the name of God, and homemakers and sanitation workers and custodians and stay-at-home parents and athletes and caregivers and educators and attorneys and landscapers and counselors and salespeople and so on and so forth, as God's vocational people sent out into the world to do God's work? What if we thought about it that way? That would revolutionize the faith presence in every city, and in every aspect, and in every facet of the world in which we live. Work is a calling. It has missional implications. It also has implications with respect to human dignity. I love what one of my heroes, Francis Schaeffer, once said, and he said this. He said, "There are no little people, there are no little places." And one of the things that we could add to that is there are no little jobs. No such thing as a little job, as an insignificant job. There's no such thing as an odd job. There's no such thing as a small job, as a menial job. So I remember a few Thanksgivings ago, I was having a conversation with a gentleman who was invited by the family that was hosting I was just meeting him for the first time, and his name was Joe, and we were talking about what we did. I hate that question in social situations. I mean, you're either stuck with one person all night because they love pastors, or they're looking at their watch. Oh my goodness, the babysitter, got to get home. The what do you do question, of course, did come up, and I said, well, I'm a minister, and sometimes I sort of tell a half-truth and say I'm a teacher, because that's a lot more interesting to people. And I said, what's your vocation? What do you spend your days doing? And he said, well, I just push a broom. And I thought to myself, he just said just. What kind of society do we live in where the person who's cleaning the streets says just about what he does? What would the world look like without janitors? What would this room look like without sanitation workers? Seriously. What would New York City, I can tell you what New York City would look like. It would be an utter disaster without people who just push a broom. And so my heart goes out to this man, not because of his erroneous thought, but because of a culture that has created this hierarchy that says, these are the important people. These are the A jobs, and these are the B, C, D, E, F, G, Z jobs. But if I read Scripture correctly, there's no such thing as an odd job or a small job or a menial job or an insignificant job. One of my colleagues named Bob Bradshaw likes to bring up the story of the janitor at Kennedy Space Center when they were about to launch a rocket, put a man on the moon. Unbelievable, right? And so the janitor is cornered in the hallway, maybe by a reporter, I can't remember who, but the janitor's cornered in the hallway, and he's sweeping the floor, and the person asks him the question, what are you doing here? And he says, I'm helping to launch a rocket. What are you doing here? That's how we need to look at work. That's how we need to look at vocation. Because really, I mean, in a sense, even the executives and the big church pastors and the book writers and those of us who have the opportunity to stand on a stage, what Anne Lamott once said is so immensely important when she was asked, what's the world going to be like in 100 years? And her answer was, all new people. And so in a sense, we're all going to go poof. In a sense, eventually all of us are going to be invisible. And there's this part of me that thinks that the people who are in society's sort of invisible positions now are the ones who, by virtue of their quote-unquote invisible positions, growing the largest souls and will have the most significant places, and people like me will be serving them and washing their feet, because in this lifetime I got to stand up on stages as a pinch hitter. Dignity. Don't ever think that there's a little person, a little place, or a little job. And the last one is witness. Under the nature of work, the last word is witness. An awareness of God's work in us, around us, and especially for us should compel us and liberate us to really go for it in whatever lane we are given to run in vocationally. In Genesis, it says that God, after he did the work of creation, God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. It was exceptionally good. He looked back and he took pride in everything that he had made, especially the last thing that he had made, which is the crown of his creation, the human person. And so, what people who believe in this God are now called to do, because they have been so loved and so dignified by being made and fashioned in his likeness and his image, is not necessarily be the best, because not everybody can be the best. Most people can't be the best, but to do everything that we can and to put all the energy into it that we can to be our best at whatever it is that we're given to do vocationally in the moment. My very first interview out of college, I got the first interview question. It was with a business. It was for a management position. I don't know why anybody would interview a 22-year-old for a management position, but I was being interviewed for a management position, and I had actually become a believer in Christ and in Christianity maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and I was really, really excited about being a believer in Christianity and in Christ. And so he asked me what my goal in life was. If you have one goal, you sum it all up in one goal, what's your goal in life? And my answer was, well, I guess the honest answer to that is that my goal in life is to go to heaven and bring as many people with me as I can. And if you're about to go into a business interview, I recommend that you don't answer the question that way. Because the follow-up question, which I suspect was a spontaneous one, not written on his list, was, are you sure you are interviewing for the right career? And that was a really important moment for me because he helped me tap into the unique way that God has made me in the same way that God has uniquely made some to go into law enforcement. And God has uniquely made some to write essays and others to work, sanitation, and others to run companies and pull teeth out of people's mouths. And God has wired each person uniquely to play a part in his story. And that was sort of an eye-opening moment for me. But I had to also wonder, how quickly did he want to get rid of me after I answered that question? Because certainly he must be thinking, well, this guy, he's not going to be any good for our company. He's too heavenly minded to be any earthly good, right? That's a very famous way of thinking about it. And there's a lot of, I think, legitimacy to people who use that phrase, because oftentimes we people of faith have used our faith and the love of God for us that can't be taken away from us ever as a justification for laziness, as a justification for not fulfilling our job description, as a justification for sticking it to the man or sticking it to those that are under us and leading in unjust ways. We justify because we've been loved by God and forgiven and everything else. So what's the point of trying to make a positive contribution when I can just sit on my laurels? And I think we all know that. We're miserable when we're sitting on our laurels, and so is everybody around us. But what if hundreds and even thousands of people of faith were unleashed into the vocations that they already have, in the places where they're already there influencing in one way, shape, or form or another the people around them and the organizations and industries in which they exist? What if thousands of people were unleashed, let's say in the city of Nashville, with a new imagination about their vocation that reflected things like witness and dignity and mission? Maybe believer, person of faith, would actually start looking as attractive on a resume as Eagle Scout or Harvard or, stayed at the same company for 15 years, loyal. What if believer was as impressive as loyal and hardworking and reliable and dependable and a person who always follows through and a person who's respectful to everybody around them, a person who honors those who are leading them and doesn't get snarky with them, and a person who treats those who are under them in the org chart with incredible dignity and pays them more than market. Because this is what the biblical vocational imagination leads us to do, to surprise people, not with laziness, but with going the extra mile. So there's also the facet of the healing of work that's the last thing that I'll touch on here, and this is incredibly important because probably, studies show, Missy has the statistic, I can't remember, but it's a vast majority of people are actually dissatisfied in their work. You heard her say that the one thing that people want around the world more than anything else is a good job where they can find satisfaction. What an incredible statistic. But most people are not satisfied in their work, and so this is a crisis, and And it brings to mind the Greek myth of Sisyphus. Have you all ever heard that myth? So Sisyphus is this mythological character who's not mythological at all. He really represents the human condition. He's punished for eternity to push a big rock up a steep hill. And over and over and over again, he almost gets to the top, and then the big rock slips out of his grasp and it rolls all the way down the hill, and then he's doomed for the rest of eternity to just keep going back down that hill, pushing it. It falls, almost to the climax, another anticlimax, it falls down. And he's just spending his whole life pushing that boulder, getting nowhere, spinning his wheels. The Sisyphus story is the human story of perpetual struggle in the realm of work. Some of us, we go into our work and we go with very, very little hope, lots of discouragement, sometimes despair, because we don't feel like we have any chance of being successful, even if we are successful. I repeat that. We feel like we don't have any chance of being successful, even if we are successful by the standards that have been set for us, either internally or externally. So Peyton Manning just got the best of Tom Brady. Have you ever heard that interview that Tom Brady did with Barbara Walters several years ago? Talk about a human condition exposure moment. Okay, he had won 3 Super Bowls, led his team. He's still in his 20s, I think. He's led his team to 3 Super Bowls. He's married to the top supermodel in the world, and they actually get along really well and have fun together. They've got properties and houses, combined income of $87 million a year together. And in the middle of the interview, he just stops and he says, you know what? I've achieved every dream that I've ever had, and there's still this restlessness. This can't be all that there is. Is this it? We all think that at the end of whatever rainbow we've contrived in our mind, there's going to be this big, celebratory pot of gold, and that we get at the end of the rainbow, and it's just this pot of sticks. Anticlimax slaps us in the face. Jim Carrey, famous actor, said that I wish that everybody could be rich and famous so that they will discover, too, that it's not the answer to anything. Kobe Bryant, in the peak of his basketball career, was asked if he was happy by Sports Illustrated, and he said, I don't believe in happiness. Tennessee Williams, after becoming famous, lived with cockroaches in somebody's closet for years in New York City before Giuliani. And, he was scratching and gutting it away like so many Nashville artists. I mean, what a courageous thing to come to a city with nothing and try to do something with your craft and put it out there for people to either embrace or reject. What a courageous thing. And so that's what he's doing for many, many years as a playwright. And then he writes not the Glass Menagerie. That was was it the Glass Menagerie? And then there was another one after that, Streetcar Named Desire. Yeah, it was the Glass Menagerie. And then he's famous. And then all of a sudden people are waiting on him hand and foot and dropping his name at parties. And he's living in a New York penthouse now, and he's arrived. And he's a very young age. And it was out of those successful conditions that he wrote an essay called The Catastrophe of Success. Because he said the very conditions that provide the soil for the best kind of creativity, i.e. misery. One of my favorite songwriters talks about how he lives with a perpetual low-grade anxiety, and that is the key to his creativity. But he said, as soon as that life's struggle was stripped from me, the Sisyphus experience was stripped from me, I lost my creativity. And then what he had to do was move to a slum in Mexico and to voluntarily put himself in impoverished conditions again. And it was out of that Streetcar Named Desire was born. Kurt Cobain, Ernest Hemingway, Alexander McQueen, the fashion guy. Sorry, I'm just kind of going off the fly right here. Vincent van Gogh, all artists, all at the top of their game, all globally recognized at the time of their death. And they all had one thing in common besides the fact that they were artists. They committed suicide. So not even success. Even success without this perspective becomes a catastrophe. So where's the hope when there's toil and thorns and sweat that frustrate us? The hope comes when those frustrations no longer define us, when we're no longer hanging our hat on those things. When we start to get it, that moment when Jesus looked at his 72 disciples after they came back from a wildly successful set of days. They'd seen some amazing things in their work, and they're celebrating, and they're kind of boasting about it to him, and he says, look, don't rejoice in these things. And he wasn't saying don't enjoy your successes. What he was saying is don't hang your hat on that. Don't plug your umbilical cord into it. Don't shape your identity around your success, because tomorrow you're going to follow me to a cross. And the mortality rate is still one person for every one person. And it's always going to be that way until God decides to fix it all, which he will, and we have that hope. But the other place where hope comes from is that in every vocation, if you believe what the Bible says about you and about God in relation to you, then you have a keen and deep understanding that God's calling on your life is not to be awesome, but to be loved, to be forgiven, to be humble and humbled, and out of these things to live faithfully at whatever lane he puts you in, and to recognize that whatever lane you're in, you're launching a rocket. You are. You're participating in a story that is much bigger than any individual or name in this room or in this great city of celebrities. Jesus said, come to me. This is his invitation. He said, come to me, all you who are weary. Bring the Sisyphus in you to me, and I will give you rest. My burden is light. And what makes his burden light? He put the burden on his back. He carried on his own back the shame that we deal with and experience in relationship to vocation, in relationship to relationships, in relationship to everything. He carried all of the shame. He endured the toil and the sweat and the thorns, so that all that remains for us who believe in him is a verdict. And it's a verdict that we get before we do our work, not after we do our work. There's no year-end review with God. The review comes at the beginning of the year, and the verdict is always, well done, good and faithful servant. That's our starting point. Well done, good and faithful servant. Your week starts with the day of rest. My day ended with the day of rest. Your day starts with the day of rest, and out of your rest, you go and work at whatever you're given to do with all your heart. Can we imagine this? What it would look like, what it would feel like to collaborate together, churches together, pastors together, individuals together, to affect every org chart, every organization, every industry that's represented in our magnificent city of Nashville. I hope that we can imagine that. Thanks for listening, and I'm sorry I took 4 minutes more than I was supposed to. So.